Hey everyone, Ranger William here from the Overmountain Victory National Historic Trail. This video is the next in the Clash of the Commanders series being done by the Southern Campaign of the American Revolution Parks Group. For this question, we are answering who is the most villainous figure of the Southern Campaign. Now this one I'm really excited to bring to you as a very interesting question to think about. And the person who I chose is not only because of his actions on the battlefield, but it's because of his actions off of the battlefield. That's where I think really you cross the line from being just a brutal commander to being a villain. Also, a lot of the stories about this guy talking about his negative traits, they don't just come from his enemies, which is to be expected, but from his allies as well, men who served alongside him. So for those reasons, my choice for the most villainous figure is the Patriot Georgia militia officer, Paddy Carr. Now, not a lot is known about Paddy Carr. He's an Irish immigrant who, sometime it's believed in the 1760s, comes to Georgia. It's not known if he has a family, but those friends he had who wrote about him talk about him being very amiable, very benevolent, saying that he never swore or uttered blasphemy, and he actually had an interesting characteristic. He described himself as being insensible to fear. So there's even a story of him sitting on some gunpowder with a lit candle to demonstrate his bravery. And when he was talking about himself, he says, yes, he's very brave, but he says he may have been a good soldier, but nature had formed his heart too tender and compassionate. So not exactly what you would expect to hear in the description of a villainous figure. Not a lot is known about him in the years before the war. Historian Lyman Draper says that he was an Indian trader in the western parts of Georgia, but he pops up on the radar again in May of 1779. He's going to be a captain in the Patriot militia there in western Georgia. Now, the war in the backcountry is extremely ruthless and brutal. Civilians are going to be often targeted by both sides in an effort to not only deter them from helping the enemy, but maybe to punish them for something that their husbands or their fathers had done. And it's in this kind of brutal environment that Paddy Carr is introduced to the revolution. It even is a slang term in the backcountry that to murder a prisoner was to give them a Georgia parole. So it's in this world that Paddy Carr comes into service. Now, there's an explanation that a few historians give describing Paddy Carr and his hatred of the Loyalists. One description says that it wasn't necessarily a personal wrong that he was avenging, but he viewed their change, their opposition to the Patriot cause and what the Patriot ideology stood for. He viewed that as a philosophical break, as a political divide, and they were no longer subject to receive mercy or kindness, even if they were prisoners. So a little bit of a different approach than what you usually hear about. In Paddy Carr, he's going to continue in service. We go from May of 1779 to the summer of 1780. He's part of a party of Georgia militia who are riding up to join the Patriots right before the Battle of Ramser's Mill in June of 1780. But they missed the battle by a single day. This is where we get one of the first stories of Paddy Carr's aggressiveness, his cruelty. Paddy Carr stops at the home of a loyalist. He stops to ask directions and get a guide. The man is home, and Paddy Carr, maybe he was surprised to see this man home with patriots all around, and he's like, aren't you a loyalist? Were you not at the battle? He says, yeah, I was. I was captured at the battle, but the patriots have paroled me, which is allowing him to go home and be with his family until he receives word that he's been exchanged. So he's technically a prisoner, even though he's not under a Patriot guard. Well, Paddy Carr explains their situation, that they need a guide to the crossroads, and the man agrees. So he saddles up, and they head up the road, and when they get to the crossroads, the loyalist hops down, points out the way, and Paddy Carr's traveling buddy, who's been with him this whole time, says that once he got the directions, Paddy Carr turned and shot the man dead there in the crossroads, and they kept riding on to the Patriot camp. His comrade is so shocked by this murder of a paroled prisoner that once they get to the camp, he reports Carr for the murder, and he's actually arrested and placed under guard. However, the next morning, Paddy Carr is seen free and walking around camp. So that's just an introduction to what Paddy Carr's service is going to be like. All the rest of the summer of 1780, Carr is going to join up with the Georgians, riding under Elijah Clark, riding and fighting all across South Carolina, including the Battle of Musgrove's Mill, where he helps serve in some scouting missions before that. In September, we find Carr at the first attack on Augusta, Georgia, the Siege of Augusta. Augusta is going to be the garrison of the Loyalist Colonel Thomas Brown and his infamous Rangers. So Elijah Clark and his guys are very adamant about capturing that outpost, but it's a failure. They're chased away. They have to flee into the mountains for safety, but rather than flee all the way up into the Nolichucky or the Watauga, Paddy Carr joins up with a group of the Georgians who go off and join the Overmountain men in their pursuit of Patrick Ferguson. So Carr is going to be there at the Battle of Kings Mountain, and he's described as fighting valiantly there, and we really hear more about Carr in the aftermath of Kings Mountain. On October 14th, you have the Patriots camped at Bickerstaff's plantation with their Loyalist prisoners, and this is where you have the famous evening trial. This is where you're going to have 36 of the Loyalist prisoners condemned to death for their service against the Patriots. Now, 9 of them are going to be hanged from a tree out front of the Bickerstaff home. The rest of them are going to be pardoned. And it's Paddy Carr who is recorded as turning to view the dangling men from the tree and say that he wished to God that every tree in the forest bore such fruit as that. So a very harsh statement there from Paddy Carr. Now, it's not recorded how long he continued with the Kings Mountain men, but we know that before November, he's back in South Carolina, and he's actually going to be part of the Thomas Sumter's command at the Battle of Blackstocks against Tarleton in November of 1780. And this is where you have another account of his cruelty. It was said that Paddy Carr was escorting 3 young prisoners, 3 young loyalists that they had captured. And Paddy Carr, he's right there at the back end of the Patriot Army with Tarleton's men and his famous cavalry coming close up behind. And what Paddy Carr does is he gets his 3 prisoners and he stands them in the road right beside him like they are also patriots. Their hands are tied, they can't flee. And Paddy Carr holds them while Tarleton's dragoons charge, and at the very last second, Carr pushes them forward and dives out of the way, as Tarleton's cavalry then charge through and kill the prisoners, their own side. So, after this, it's said that when Paddy Carr was leaving South Carolina, trying to get back to Georgia, that he personally killed 18 more Loyalists on the way. It's not recorded how this happened, if it was in a battle like Blackstocks, or maybe it was in these little asking for directions and then murdering them kind of situations. But he gets back to Georgia, and early spring of 1781 is going to find Carr with a group of Georgia militia, and they actually murder 9 men in the area of Wrightsboro, Georgia. This is going to be above Augusta, and plundering the homes of many Loyalist families up there. So just kind of riding around, attacking what they view as the enemy any way they can. Later that summer, during the second attempt to capture Augusta, looking at April and May of 1781, Elijah Clark heard that Loyalist militia were being recruited to come rescue the garrison. There's a force coming to break the siege. And so he's going to send out groups from the siege, from his Patriot Army, to stop those reinforcements and give them the time they need to capture Augusta. Carr is going to be part of these groups. One of the first is going to be at a place called Walker's Bridge, where it's said that Paddy Carr and his Georgia Patriots, they found these Loyalist reinforcements. They killed a number of the adherents with a very considerable loss. So taking casualties on both sides during this clash at Walker's Bridge. However, during a second attempt to break the siege, Paddy Carr and his guys, they go and stop Loyalist militia at a place called the Bug Plantation. Now this is going to be a force of Loyalist militia as well as Allied Indians. They are ambushed by Paddy Carr and his Georgians, and it's recorded that they didn't lose any men in the attack, and they slaughtered the Loyalists indiscriminately. Another source says that no prisoners were taken and the entire Loyalist force was massacred by Paddy Carr and his men. Later on, in either the summer of 81 or early of 1782, Paddy Carr is going to be promoted to a major. This is going to give him some of the authority to kind of go off on his own missions and pursue more Tories, his former neighbors. And it said of him that he would hunt them down like wild beasts and permitted no asylum to protect them. So no matter where they went, how far they went, where they were hiding, Paddy Carr wanted to make sure that he caught and killed them. On November 2nd, 1781, the Georgia Patriots under James Jackson are going to lead an attack against a Loyalist blockhouse on the Ogeechee River. It's a little bit of a standoff. The Patriots have the numbers. They don't really want to shed blood if they don't have to, so a truce is agreed upon. And as the Loyalists walk out and start surrendering themselves, Carr steps forward and begins murdering them. One account says that the Loyalist officer, seeing this happening, thinking a general slaughter is about to begin, shouts to his men to sell their lives dearly. They dive back into their blockhouse, they fortify it, and they begin firing out, and the defense is too strong for the Patriots to capture. They have to break off the attack. James Jackson personally blamed Paddy Carr and his atrocity of killing the prisoner for the loss of the Patriot lives from that Loyalist gunfire. Later on, in April of 1782, you're going to see General Anthony Wayne has taken command of the Patriots, surrounding and pushing in on Savannah, Georgia, and Paddy Carr is sent down from the Savannah area. He's sent down to the St. Mary's River, where it's reported that there's a Loyalist storehouse supplying some more Loyalist raiders and militia, and Carr is effective. He not only destroys the storehouse, but it's said that his men then desert from their orders, they fan out into the settlement, and they start looting and plundering the inhabitants around the area of Darren, Georgia. Now, at one point during the war, there's going to be an intense skirmish, and it's reported by the Loyalists that Paddy Carr is killed. And this news is great celebration for the Loyalists in Georgia. In fact, Royal Governor James Wright, he writes about this moment back to London, saying that in the letter, Paddy Carr, quote, remarkable for his being concerned in many murders committed on the loyal inhabitants of this province, is missed by the rebels, and we hope he is among the slain. Now, they would later find out that Carr had not been killed, and they were not so fortunate. He's back in the saddle shortly thereafter. Now, Carr was not shy about his feelings either. He was part of a group of Georgia militia one time who captured a Loyalist who was known to be planning an attack, plotting an ambush, and he advocated openly right then and there that they should immediately kill him. However, his superior colonel who was there, Colonel Twiggs, stopped Paddy Carr in that case. Now, by 1783, in the formal end of the war, Paddy Carr was said to have personally killed 100 Loyalists by his own hand. And once the war ended, Carr didn't stop pursuing those who had been Loyalists. In fact, one time in 1790, he was arrested for the murder of Aquila Massey. He was sentenced to death because this was after the war. This was an outright crime. But before the sentence could be carried out, he was rescued by his friends, who later would petition the governor, and Paddy Carr was pardoned. Now, Paddy Carr, who lived a violent life, he did meet a violent end. He was murdered in August of 1802, reportedly by a family member of one of the Loyalists that he had murdered during the war. Now, he was hailed as a bit of a hero in the local newspaper obituary, and they called him an avenger of his country's wrongs, and went on to explain his actions, apparently, which were very well known. It was said that, like other men, Carr had failings, and who is perfect? Say he was rigid. It was a time when vigor was a virtue, and levity would have been a crime. So they're trying to explain why Paddy Carr had been the way he was, why he had thought it necessary to kill and murder so many men. Now, the description of Paddy Carr's service in the backcountry and his military record, it's not too dissimilar from other backcountry militia officers when the war was filled with personal vendettas. For example, even Thomas Young, a famous patriot soldier who wrote his great memoirs of the war, he claimed to have personally killed 100 Loyalists by the time the war had ended. But Carr's legacy, however, is different for how he viewed Tories as targets even off the battlefield. We cannot allow the fact that Carr was a patriot blind us from the crimes that he committed. A 1922 article was fairly blinded when it wrote about Paddy Carr in the Journal of the American Irish Historical Society. It described Paddy Carr and his service as like a star shining through the gloom, dissipating despair and enkindling confidence in the hearts of the soldiers and the people. However, if we go back to the more primary contemporary sources, we can better cut through that kind of patriotic euphoria and kind of find the truth. The eulogy at Carr's funeral was delivered by a man who served with him, a man named Lieutenant Jefferson, and he described Paddy Carr as a honey of a patriot who left a name remembered to other times, mixed with a few virtues and 1,000 crimes. That was the entire eulogy. So thousands of men served in the vicious fighting of the southern backcountry. Thousands fought and killed for their various reasons, but few were noted for their villainous execution of prisoners, the attacks on civilians, their 1,000 crimes, like Paddy Carr. So that's why he's my choice for the most villainous figure. I hope you enjoyed watching the video, learning a little bit more about this guy. Thank you for watching.